At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. I mean, in the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name is the Voice Ogre, and let's begin. The aliens arrived mid-shift, which felt particularly rude. They skipped the subtle infiltration, the gradual reveal. They just appeared. They tore open space-time in high Earth orbit with the quiet, obscene violence of a popped seam. One moment, only the serene curve of the Earth graced the star-dusted black. The next, the hegemony's third glorious conquest feat occupied the emptiness above. The collection of ships resembled colossal tusks of polished volcanic glass designed to gut a god. They hung there, their presence a weight that crushed the orbital quiet. A magnificent and horrifying declaration of cosmic ownership. Then, the broadcast came, skipping dialogue and going straight to the verdict. High Sovereign Torx's face filled every screen on and off the planet. He was a monument of a being, tall and powerfully built, with a jaw that looked like it was hewn from granite. Two polished ivory tusks protruded from his lower lip, etched with the filigree of 100 conquered worlds. His voice was a calm, resonant baritone, the kind of voice that could announce the end of a species and make it sound like a profound act of mercy. "People of this world, which you call Earth," the translation software flawlessly rendered his condescending certainty. "I am High Sovereign Torx of the Hegemony. We have observed you. We have studied your histories, your factions, your endless petty squabbles." He gestured with a three-fingered hand, a motion of dismissal. "You are fractured, weak, a house divided against itself. Your potential is squandered on internal conflict. You lack a unified voice with which to address the cosmos." He paused. Across 1 billion households and government chambers, every breath was held. "We are that voice. We are the order that you lack. Submit and find purpose in the hegemony. Your world will be folded into our glory. Your people will serve. This is not a negotiation. It is your salvation. You have one planetary rotation to tender your unconditional surrender." Across the planet, from the UN Security Council in Geneva to the corporate Congress on the lunar orbital on Olympus Command, a frantic, predictable ballet of outrage and debate erupted. Officials proposed sanctions. They debated coalitions. They drafted sternly worded condemnations. Humanity, faced with extinction, did what it did best. It scheduled a meeting. Torx, a being for whom indecision was cultural heresy, acted. As the first arguments unfolded, elegant, silent pods detached from his fleet. They were little more than massive tungsten rods sharpened to a point and wrapped in minimalistic Vidic accelerator. They fell. Their descent was silent. They punched through the atmosphere, barely glowing, moving at a velocity that turned air to a secondary consideration. The first one struck New York. The impact bypassed explosion for a lesson in physics, taught with extreme prejudice. The kinetic energy transfer was so immense that the bedrock for miles around flash liquefied, throwing a plume of vaporized city into the stratosphere. The metropolis, and everything for 100 miles around it, simply ceased to exist. Tokyo followed a second later, then Sydney. The planet's communication networks, moments before abuzz with debate, became a single global scream of pure terror. The hegemony's calculations showed them an easy conquest. They had accounted for every variable. Their calculations omitted the bastards. The chaos on Earth was a silent, flickering horror show on the grime-streaked screens of the Elysian Hold, a pressurized bar carved into a piece of nickel iron orbiting Mars. The atmosphere was a thick cocktail of processed oxygen, spilled beer, and quiet desperation. Here, in the shadowy margins of the solar system, the dregs, the outcasts, and the forgotten children of Earth watched their homeworld burn. Nash, a man built like a breaching charge with a temper to match, slammed a metal-gloved fist on the table. Empty glasses rattled and jumped. They're just gonna sit there. They're gonna talk and posture and vote while those bastards turn the whole planet into a parking lot. His voice, a gravelly roar, cut through the bar's stunned hush. Slumped in a corner booth, Quinn stared into a glass of something that smelled like industrial solvent and soured ambition. His face was a roadmap of broken veins and lost battles. He was a ghost in a worn flight jacket, haunted by the ghost of the fleet admiral he was supposed to have been. Useless, he muttered into his drink. His voice a slurred, eloquent drawl. Even if they agreed on something, they lacked the skill to fight them. Look at them. Perfect positioning, flawless execution. They're professionals. And we've got fucking committees. Zane, captain of the smuggler ship, the Magpie, remained silent. She watched the screens, her anger a cold, dense thing that preceded action. Her knuckles were white where she gripped her own glass. She saw the burning cities, but she also saw the arrogant, perfect lines of the hegemonic fleet. She saw an enemy that believed it had already won. To Zane, who spent her entire life salvaging wrecks and turning junk into weapons, overconfidence was just another salvageable commodity. Sitting opposite her, Ren ignored the screen. She watched her crewmates. Her thumb endlessly, rhythmically, rubbed the worn face of a silver coin from a dead Earth nation. She was small and quiet, easily overlooked, which was her greatest weapon. She saw systems, digital, social, military, all just puzzles waiting for a solution. The news anchor, her face composed and her voice steady, mentioned emergency UN sessions and appeals to interstellar law. Ren let out a short, bitter laugh, sharper than a shard of glass. They're writing angry letters while the house is on fire. Her gaze, dark and intense, shifted to Zane. She stopped rubbing the coin. Their fleet sits in a garage up there, she said, her voice low and steady. The Sol Defense Fleet. The biggest, baddest stick humanity's ever built. Locked up in the Phobos fleet yards because the nations and the corps feared each other too much to let anyone have the keys. She leaned forward, eyes glinting in the dim light of the burning world on the screen. The government won't use it. They can't. They'd have to agree first. Her lips twisted into a small, dangerous smile. If they won't, then we will. The idea hung there, audacious, treasonous, and completely insane. Nash's manic grin spread across his face. You're talking about Grand Theft Starship. Grand Theft Armada, Ren corrected. Quinn finally looked up from his whiskey, a flicker of the old commander sparkling in his bloodshot eyes. He grunted. You're all insane. Zane met Ren's gaze. The cold anger in her eyes burned hot. She thought of the governments that labeled her a criminal, the corporations that tried to put her out of business, the system that discarded people like her, like Nash, like Quinn, like Ren, as scrap. Now that same system failed to protect the one thing they all, in their own broken ways, still called home. Get the Magpie ready. Zane's voice cut through the bar's despair like a diamond drill. Quinn, you need a coffee, like a real cup of coffee. She pushed her chair back and stood. Ren's right. Let's go steal their fucking warships. The bridge of the Magpie was a cluttered, claustrophobic space that smelled of overloaded circuits, old coffee, and desperation. It was home. Wires snaked across the floor, held down with metallic foil tape. The consoles were a mismatched collection of military surplus and custom-built hardware. each one bearing the scars of a dozen frantic, jury-rigged repairs. Quinn, more corpse than ghost, hunched over a secondary console. The black coffee stain Zane forced down his throat seemed to work, sharpening the edges of his drunken haze. In front of him sat his black box, a heavily encrypted, physically shielded data slate, the last remnant of his life as Commander Quinn of the Sole Defense Fleet Planning Commission. It held his life's work, and his life's greatest shame. With trembling fingers, he tapped in a long, complex series of codes. Layers of his own paranoid encryption peeled away like an onion. Finally, a schematic bloomed on the screen. A labyrinth of blue lines and glowing nodes that represented the defense network of the Phobos fleet yards orbiting Mars. "All right," he said, his voice raspy but gaining strength. "Listen up, because this is the part where you realize how monumentally screwed we are. The Phobos fleet yard's defenses are entirely automated. It relies on a singular, custom-built AI, a digital Cerberus I helped design. Codename Warden." He zoomed in on a cluster of icons representing weapons platforms. "Warden's control extends over interlock and kill switches, subspace entangled comms, and enough defense platforms to vaporize a small moon. The nations were so paranoid of each other that no one allowed another faction's security teams near the code. They all insisted on a neutral AI." Nash peered over his shoulder. "So we blow the door down?" "Yeah, the door has a 300 terawatt plasma cannon pointed at it," Quinn countered dryly. "And the only physical override is a 3-key system. One key held by the UN, one by the corporate Congress, one by the Martian hegemony. They were more worried about humans stealing the ships than aliens. No, we don't knock. We convince it to let us in." He tapped another sequence, and a hidden layer of schematics appeared, thin red lines running parallel to the main blue ones. "But I was always paranoid. I buried a few private entrances deep inside the Warden's core heuristic learning library. I disguised them as routines for adapting to unforeseen human command errors. A standard audit would miss them. They look like part of its personality." He pointed a finger, steadier now, at a single blinking node on the edge of the network map. "Ren, this is where you go in. A diagnostic port for the secondary life support system. Disguised as a passive heatsink on docking bay 86. Warden will see your intrusion signature. It'll treat you like a cancer, and we'll hunt you. It'll try to fry your console, your ship's systems, and your brain if it can." Ren just nodded, her focus absolute as she absorbed the data. "I can't fight it for you," Quinn continued, his eyes meeting hers, "but I can be your guide. I know this maze better than anyone. I can tell you where the walls are solid and where they're holographic, but you are the ones who are going to have to walk through them." The heist was no longer a simple theft. It was an exorcism. Quinn gave them more than a map to steal a fleet. He gave them the keys to dismantle his own ghost. A high-stakes digital duet between the fallen master and the prodigy hacker. Zane watched them, a grim sense of purpose settling in her gut. The plan was suicidal. It was their only shot. The Magpie approached the Phobos fleet yards not as a warship, but as a dying animal. Zane had the helm, her hands moving with an artist's delicacy across the controls of her battered freighter. She pushed the ship's fusion drive far past the red line and engaged in what spacers called a suicide burn. A high-velocity, uncontrolled trajectory that mimicked a catastrophic engine failure. Plasma bled from ruptured conduits along the hull, a brilliant peacock tail of superheated gas. Heat signatures flared erratically. The ship tumbled end over end, a piece of space junk moments from tearing itself apart. It was a masterpiece of orchestrated disaster. On the comms, Quinn was reborn. The slurring drunk vanished, replaced by the cold, commanding voice of a commander. He avoided old fleet command codes. Those would have triggered an immediate lockdown. Instead, he broadcast on a low-priority engineering channel and used emergency maintenance procedures he wrote himself a decade ago. Harry's Warden, this is Freighter Leaky Bucket. Registry deleted. Flight plan irrelevant. His voice crackled with faked static and panic. We have a critical reactor breach. Magnetic containment is failing. I repeat, containment is failing. Request an emergency docking for immediate manual override and evacuation. He added a string of technical jargon, a stream of failure codes and reactor specifications that were utter nonsense but sounded terrifyingly plausible. Targeting manual override nexus at docking bay 86 for immediate access. The Depot Master's AI, logical to a fault, processed the input. A small, unregistered freighter with a failing reactor was a potential threat to the entire station. A massive, inert fleet was a static value. Warden's programming dictated the prioritization of immediate, verifiable threats, and weighed the variables. The minuscule probability of a criminal raid against the high probability of a catastrophic reactor explosion originating from the leaky bucket. Logic dictated the choice. Access granted. Docking Bay 86. A synthesized voice echoed on the Magpie's bridge. Rerouting automated procedures to accommodate emergency directive. Proceed. The fortress had just unlocked its own door. The virus convinced the system to welcome it in. Docking clamps, each the size of a small building, locked onto the Magpie's scarred hull with a heavy, final thud. The ship shuddered, and then the air went still. The heist began. The assault was two-pronged, a silent ballet of violence in both the physical and the digital realms. On the Magpie's bridge, Wren was already gone. Her consciousness plunged into the depot's network. Her fingers jabbed and slid across her console, the holographic display reflecting in her wide, unblinking eyes. Abstract shapes of hostile code, Warden's countermeasures, lunged at her intrusion point. They were elegant, geometric structures of pure logic, designed to identify and annihilate any foreign data. Firewall at the first data hub. Quinn's voice was a calm whisper in her ear, relayed from his own console. It's a decoy. It'll trap you in a feedback loop. Reroute through the tertiary power conduit. It's unmonitored. Wren's fingers danced. Her own code, a messy, chaotic tangle of brutal effectiveness, bypassed the elegant trap and slammed into the network's unprotected underbelly. Silent digital alarms screamed inside the Warden's core programming. The AI realized the reactor leak was a ghost. Simultaneously, the Magpie's main airlock hissed open. Nash, Zane, and a two-person team of hand-picked smugglers moved into the sterile white corridor of Docking Bay 86. They wore dark, non-reflective vacuum suits, their weapons silenced. Their target was the manual override nexus, the AI's physical brainstem. 3 elite technicians were stationed there, a biological failsafe. Their job was simple. If Warden was ever compromised, they would turn their 3 separate keys in a central console, physically severing the AI's connection to the fleet and flash-frying any hacker jacked into the network. Nash held up a hand, his team freezing behind him. He pointed down the long corridor. 3 figures in gray station coveralls sprinted toward a reinforced blast door. They had been alerted. Now killing. Zane sub-vocalized over their private comm. We need them breathing. Spoil sport. Nash grumbled, but he unslung a heavy pulse rifle set to stun. The hunt began. The technicians were trained, but they were engineers, unprepared for combat. Nash's team moved with the silent, deliberate grace of apex predators. They flanked, using maintenance alcoves and support struts for cover. A stun blast sent the first technician sprawling. The second was tackled by one of Nash's team and disarmed before he could raise his sidearm. The third technician reached the blast door and slapped his hand on the control panel. As the heavy door began to slide shut, Nash launched himself into a full-speed slide across the polished deck, He slid under the descending door with inches to spare and rolled to his feet inside the control room. The technician stared, wide-eyed, then lunged for the central console with his key. Nash was faster. A single sharp blow to the back of the man's neck sent him crumpling to the floor, unconscious. Through the reinforced window of the control room, they could see it. The cavernous, silent hangar bay, filled with the dormant, monolithic shapes of Earth's warships. Back on the Magpie, Wren grunted, sweat beading on her forehead. "Warden's adapting. It's learning my patterns. It's trying to corner me." "It's a machine, Wren. It thinks in straight lines." Quinn's voice was urgent. "Do something it can't predict. Do something irrational." Wren's lips curled into a feral grin. "Got it." Instead of dodging the next wave of hostile code, she met it head-on. She fed it a recursive logic loop, a digital paradox that had no answer. This statement is false. Warden's processors, designed for absolute logic, stalled for a microsecond as they tried to solve the unsolvable. That microsecond was all the time she needed. She bypassed the final firewall. "I'm in!" she yelled, her voice hoarse. "Power's ours! The whole damn system is ours!" A moment after Wren's triumphant shout, alarms blared across the Phobos fleet yards. Red lights flashed, casting demonic shadows across the silent titans in the hangar. The Warden AI, finally fully recognizing the extent of the intrusion, threw every last defense it had at them. A man barring the door after the wolves were in the house is a man too late. Zane was already on the bridge of the nearest ship, a sleek, half-finished battlecruiser that had never tasted vacuum. The air was stale. The metal cold. Dust motes danced in the beam of her helmet light. She ran her hand over a console labeled Main Reactor Ignition, a panel of dark, dead glass. "Wren, light her up!" she commanded over the comm. "Lighten her up!" Wren's voice crackled back. For a moment, nothing. The quiet in the vast hangar was absolute, broken only by the distant, wailing alarms. The weight of their insane gamble pressed down on Zane. Did it work? Was it all for nothing? Then, a low, gut-deep hum began. It started as a vibration in the deck plates, a tremor you felt in your bones before you heard it. Lights flickered to life across the bridge, one by one. Consoles, dark for a decade, glowed with a fierce amber light, displaying diagnostic readouts and status reports. Emergency clamps around the battlecruiser's hull retracted with explosive hisses of depressurized gas. The hum grew into a roar, a deep, resonant growl that shook the entire station. It was the sound of a dormant leviathan taking its first breath in a generation. It was the sound of kilometers of wiring surging with power, of fusion reactors spinning up from cold slumber, of weapon systems running self-checks. Across the vastness of the hangar bay, a wave of light and sound spread from ship to ship. Dozens of destroyers, frigates, and cruisers awoke in a symphony of ignition. The thunderous chorus of engines coming online drowned the alarms. This was the moment. The hegemony's calculations showed them an easy conquest. Then, Earth's warships roared to life. From the command chair of a newly christened battlecruiser, the Audacity, Zane sent a broadcast. She bypassed encryption. She blasted it wide beam on every known outlaw channel, from the smuggling dens of the Belt to the pirate anchorages hidden in Jupiter's Trojan asteroids. The camera on the bridge was jury-rigged, the image grainy. It showed her face, smudged with grease and grime, her eyes burning with an intensity that cut through the poor resolution. Behind her, the chaotic, newly activated bridge was a hive of activity. Her smugglers and Nash's bruisers frantically tried to make sense of consoles designed for trained naval crews, with Quinn's sharp commands cutting through the noise. "This is Captain Zane of the Soul Defense Fleet, I guess," she said, a wry, tired smirk touching her lips. "You've seen the news. You've seen the fires. You know what's happening down in our homeworld." She leaned closer to the camera, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial growl. "The governments are still committee. They're still drafting resolutions. They are not coming to save us. But they have left us the keys to their armory, hanging by the door, and we just picked the lock." The view switched to an external camera. The image was breathtaking. Floating in the silent darkness behind the Audacity were a dozen sleek gray destroyers and 4 heavy frigates, their running lights glowing like angry eyes. The motley collection of outlaw ships that arrived with the Magpie looked like tugboats next to a pod of killer whales. "The hegemony thinks that Earth is an easy mark," Zane's voiceover continued, laced with cold fury. "They think that we're fractured, leaderless. They think that we're just waiting to be conquered. Let's show them how very, very wrong they are." The camera switched back to her face. "Any bastard with a ship, a gun, and a reason to fight for the dirt we all came from. Rendezvous at these coordinates. We're going to war." She paused, and her smirk returned, sharper this time. "And as for payment is whatever you can salvage from the aliens' burning wrecks. Zane out." The response was a torrent. They emerged from the darkness of space like sharks sensing blood in the water. Ships of every shape and size. A motley, ugly, and beautiful collection of defiance. Pirate corvettes bristled with illegal railgun modifications. Bulky asteroid miners, their hulls pockmarked from 1,000 impacts, aimed massive industrial cutting lasers forward. Sleek, fast smuggling vessels designed for running blockades powered up hidden weapon systems. A fleet of individuals, of survivors, of scum. It was Frankenstein's fleet, and it was glorious. On the bridge of the Audacity, Quinn, now clean-shaven and wearing a scavenged officer's jacket that was a size too big, stood before the main holotable. The fires of a war he was born to fight burned away the alcoholic haze. He was the conductor of this mad orchestra. His mind, the only thing holding the chaotic symphony together. He avoided rigid naval arrangements. That would be suicide. He embraced the chaos, turning their weaknesses into strengths. "The quarrymen, that Belter mining consortium," he said, pointing to a cluster of bulky, ugly ships. "Their thermal lances were designed to crack asteroids a kilometer wide. Ren, can you bypass their safety limiters and recalibrate their focusing arrays?" "Already on it," Ren replied from her station, her fingers a blur. "They'll be able to slice through a hegemonic cruiser's armor, but they'll probably melt their own emitters after about 3 shots." "Good enough." Quinn nodded. "Nash, those pirate crews from the Jovian Trojans, they're using their boarding actions. I want you to drill them. Forget ship-to-ship combat. They are our boarding parties. Their job is to get inside the enemy ships and cause hell." Nash grinned, a wide, feral slash across his face. "Now you're speaking my language, old man." It was a chaotic, desperate, and terrifyingly effective mobilization. Freighters had their cavernous cargo bays retrofitted into makeshift magnetic accelerators, designed to launch solid iron slugs ripped from the hulls of derelict stations. Courier ships were loaded with every explosive they could find, turning them into fast-moving proximity mines. Quinn was building an army. He was weaponizing a riot, and it was time for their first test. Quinn identified their first target with scalpel-like grace. A small hegemonic supply convoy moving from the outer system, protected by 2 light frigates. It was bait, a tempting morsel to test the teeth of his new unruly fleet. Quinn set the ambush in a dense asteroid field near the outer orbit of Mars, a place where sensors were unreliable and cover was plentiful. The hegemonic frigates proceeded with the flawless, predictable arrangement of a textbook military maneuver. They moved in perfect symmetry, Their patrol vectors calculated for maximum coverage in open space. They were swans, gliding on a placid lake, completely unprepared for the piranhas lurking beneath the surface. Quinn used their perfection against them. "Sheepdogs, go," we commanded over the fleet-wide channel. The sheepdogs were a dozen of the fastest pirate corvettes. They darted out from behind asteroids, fired single, inaccurate potshots, and then vanished again. They were gnats, an annoyance. The hegemonic frigates, bound by their doctrine to engage any hostile target, altered their course to pursue. Their commanders irritated but confident. The gnats led them deeper and deeper into the dense, cluttered field. Zane, piloting the nimble magpie herself, played her own part. She used the ship's tractor beams as a shepherd's crook, nudging smaller asteroids into the hegemonic path, forcing them to divert, to break their perfect arrangement to focus on navigation instead of their sensor screens. Finally, the two frigates passed a particularly large, iron-rich asteroid, which temporarily blinded their long-range scanners. It was the kill zone. "Hammer, strike now." Quinn's voice was ice. From the shadow of the massive asteroid, the Audacity and the fleet's other heavy hitters erupted. The repurposed mining lances of the quarrymen fired, not as beams, but as blinding, cohesive pulses of pure heat that slagged armor plating in an instant. The makeshift magnetic accelerators on the freighters hurled their iron slugs, brutal, dumb projectiles that smashed through shields with sheer kinetic force. The attack was overwhelming, the cacophony of violence from a dozen different vectors. One hegemonic frigate, its engines crippled and its hull breached, was dead in space within 30 seconds. "Boarding teams, you're clear!" Nash roared over the comm. "Let's go get paid!" His ship, a heavily modified boarding vessel named the Can Opener, slammed into the side of a disabled hegemonic transport. Magnetic grapples locked on with a deafening clang, and breaching charges blew a hole in the alien hull. Nash was the first one through the breach, a shotgun in each hand, his laughter echoing over the comms as he led the charge into the heart of the ship. The victory was messy. It was brutal. It cost them 2 pirate corvettes that got too bold and were vaporized by hegemonic point defense fire. But it was a victory. They captured thousands of tons of valuable supplies, fuel, and munitions. Most importantly, they captured the surviving frigate's intact data core. They had just found the enemy's playbook. In the tactical room of the Audacity, a space that still smelled of fresh paint and old dust, Quinn and Wren locked themselves away with their prize. The hegemonic data core floated in a containment field, a sphere of interlocking data pathways. While Wren began the arduous process of bypassing the encryption, Quinn paced before the holotable. He studied replays of the battle, watching the movements of the 2 frigates. "Look at this," he murmured, tracing a finger along the glowing red line of a patrol vector. "Perfectly disciplined. Every maneuver executed without a single deviation. They are magnificent. A classic command and control structure of a traditionalist empire. Every ship is a limb of a single body, and it responds to one mind, the High Sovereign." "I'm in," Wren announced quietly, her eyes fixed on her console. The datasphere shattered into a million points of light, reforming into readable file structures. Schematics, command directives, weapon yields, even cultural files. Religious doctrine. Quinn stopped pacing. "Show me their command structure, their rules of engagement." Wren pulled up a file. A complex flowchart written in the hegemony's angular script, which her software slowly translated. Quinn leaned in, his eyes scanning the text, his mind connecting dots no one else could see. He went still. He found something. A subsection buried deep within a file labeled Code of Honor, Section Gamma, Combat Succession and Spiritual Purity. My God, he breathed, his voice filled with a terrible, dawning awe. He read the translated text aloud. In the face of an inferior, chaotic foe, the preservation of the command structure is paramount to the preservation of honor. Should the senior hegemonic officer in any engagement be slain, standing orders dictate an immediate tactical withdrawal of all subordinate units to preserve the chain of command and prevent a dishonorable rout. He looked up, first at Ren, then at Zane, who had just entered the room. His eyes were alight with a terrifying, brilliant fire. "It's a hardwired imperative," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "A religious law. We can't beat their fleet ship for ship. They're too good, they're too numerous, too advanced. But they have a single, fatal point of failure." He tapped the icon representing High Sovereign Torx' flagship on the tactical map. "We don't have to destroy the Serpent. We just have to cut the head off." The war had just changed. It was no longer a battle of annihilation. It was a targeted assassination. The outlaw fleet, bolder now, struck again. Their target this time was a key hegemonic communications relay orbiting Jupiter, a vital node in their network. As the main battle raged around the station, a brawl of feints and flanking maneuvers designed by Quinn to keep the hegemonic fleet occupied, Ren engaged in her own private war. Her opponent was a logic weaver Zol, the guardian of the hegemonic battle network. He was good, incredibly good. His code was elegant, structured, like a cathedral built of light. He anticipated her intrusion vectors and patched holes in his defenses almost as fast as she could create them. It was a vicious, high-speed duel in cyberspace, a chess match played at the speed of light. But Ren was playing chess. Chess had rules. She ignored the primary firewalls and launched a brutal flood of logic bombs and contradictory commands at a peripheral system, the targeting computer of a lone hegemonic destroyer on the edge of the battle. The system, designed for clean inputs, buckled under the barbarian raid. Zol's digital presence rushed to the breach to erect new defenses, but it was too late. Ren was already in. She didn't want to take over the ship. She just wanted one thing, the trigger for its main guns. The hegemonic comms, which the humans now monitored, filled with confused chatter from the destroyer's bridge. "Sir, our primary turrets move without command." "Lock it down," the captain barked. On his own command vessel, Zol frantically tried to sever the compromised ship's connection to the network, to isolate the cancer. But Ren was a virus that had already reached the heart. She slammed the digital fire command to the compromised system. The destroyer's turret, which had swiveled to lock onto its own squadron leader, unleashed a full, devastating volley of plasma. The squadron leader, a heavy cruiser, vanished in a flash of incandescent light. Before Zol or the destroyer's crew could react, Ren found the ship's reactor controls and triggered a catastrophic overload. The destroyer swelled, glowed, and then detonated, turning into a miniature sun. On the hegemonic network, the psychological shockwave was more damaging than the physical one. A ship had not been destroyed. It had been turned into a weapon against its own. It was a violation. It was blasphemy. On the pristine, circular bridge of the flagship, the Will of Ages, High Sovereign Torx watched the recording of the destroyer's self-destruction. The hologram flickered and died, leaving a profound quiet in its wake. Logic Weaver Zol appeared as a smaller hologram beside the command throne.
"High Sovereign, the human corruption has breached our network. It is a form of digital chaos I have never witnessed. It seeks destruction, not control. It is blasphemous.
One of Torx's subcommanders, a younger, decorated officer named Hale, stepped forward. His tusks were sharp and unadorned, a sign of a rising star. "High Sovereign," he began, his voice carefully respectful. "These humans do not fight with honor. Their chaos has a pattern. It is weaponized irrationality. Our logic dictates that we must analyze and adapt, lest our discipline be turned against us." Torx turned his head slowly, his gaze falling upon Hale. The air on the bridge grew cold enough to form frost. "Sub-Commander Hale," he said, his voice a soft, dangerous rumble. "You are suggesting that we learn from vermin? That we abandon the sacred doctrines that have granted the hegemony 1,000 victorious worlds, because we are pestered by insects? To change our tactics is to admit the enemy has merit. To admit they have merit is an act of spiritual dishonor." He calmly, almost lazily, unholstered the heavy gravitic pistol at his hip. He aimed it at Hale's chest. "The code is absolute," Torx said, his voice unchanged. He pulled the trigger. A silent pulse of gravitic energy slammed into Hale and crushed him into a heap of broken armor and bone. The sub-commander collapsed without a sound. Torx holstered his weapon and turned back to the main view screen. "We will meet them with overwhelming force in perfect discipline. Their chaos will break against the wall of our honor." The message was brutally clear to every other officer on the bridge. Adaptation was heresy, and heresy was punishable by death. Buoyed by their successes, the outlaw fleet grew bold. Too bold. A charismatic pirate captain named Jet, a man whose reputation was built on daring raids and reckless charges, commanded the squadron of fast attack craft called the Fireflies. He approached Zane with a plan. A daring, high-speed raid on a major hegemonic staging ground near Ganymede. Quinn, studying the tactical map, warned against it. "The plan's flawed. It relies on speed over strategy. The hegemony isn't stupid, Zane. They're just rigid. This feels like a trap." He looked at Jet, who stood beside Zane with a confident swagger. "The man's a brawler, not a tactician. He sees glory. He doesn't see the tactical map." But Zane felt the pressure of command, the need to keep the fragile coalition of pirates and smugglers together. Jet was popular. His crews were spoiling for a fight. And the promise of a massive salvage haul was tempting. Against her better judgment, she agreed. The plan went wrong almost immediately. Jet, hungry for personal glory, broke from the group. He and his Fireflies charged ahead of the schedule and screamed into the hegemonic staging area with guns blazing, hoping to catch the enemy by surprise. There was no surprise. Torx, guided by Logic Weaver Zol, who traced the ghost of Ren's previous intrusion back to its source, waited for them. The staging ground was the cheese, and Jet was the mouse. The hegemonic fleet, hidden in Ganymede's shadow, closed the trap. They appeared in a brutal, overwhelming concentration of firepower. The outlaw fleet was mauled. Jet's squadron, caught in the open, was annihilated in the first salvo. The battle turned into a frantic, desperate retreat. Zane and Quinn managed to coordinate an escape, but the cost was staggering. They limped away from Ganymede, having lost nearly a third of their ships. The defeat was a cold, brutal shock. Back on the bridge of the Audacity, morale plummeted. Nash raged and smashed his fist into a bulkhead, his anger covering the loss of friends. Ren was silent, face pale. the silver coin still in her hand. Quinn sat in a corner on the bridge, a newly opened bottle of whiskey in his hand, the ghost returning to his eyes. Zane stood alone at the view screen, watching the last of their battered ships straggle in. She faced the crushing weight of her command, the bitter taste of her own misplaced trust. The fleet of bastards, humanity's last best chance, was on the verge of breaking apart. Staring at the tactical display, Zane watched the main hegemonic fleet, a swarm of red icons, begin its final inexorable descent upon Earth. They had one chance left, one throw of the dice. She walked across the bridge where Quinn was staring into his bottle, as if it held all the answers. She took it from his hand. He looked up, his eyes unfocused. "Leave it. It's over." "No," Zane said, her voice quiet but hard as steel. "It's not. I made a mistake. A bad one. I listened to the loudest voice in the room instead of the smartest one. I trusted the wrong person." She met his gaze, her own eyes burning with a desperate intensity. "Now I'm trusting you. I need you, Quinn the drunk, the commander." A flicker of the old fire returned to Quinn's eyes. He looked from the bottle in her hand to the tactical map, to the red tide sweeping toward the blue marble of Earth. He pushed himself up from his chair, his movements slow and deliberate. The haze of alcohol burned away, replaced by a terrifying Arctic clarity. He walked to the holotable and with a sweep of his hand cleared the old display. "That's arrogant," he began, his voice low and intense, drawing the attention of the entire bridge crew. "Torx is so convinced of his superiority, of our chaos, he'll expect us to break and run, or to make one last glorious, stupid charge." He began to move icons around the map, his hands sketching a new plan in lines of light. "So, we'll give him what he expects." He outlined what he called the pincer of madness. It was suicidal, an all-or-nothing gamble that hinged entirely on exploiting Torx's cultural rigidity and the strategic imperative they had discovered. "Faster ships, corvettes, smugglers, they'll be the bait," he explained. "They'll engage the hegemonic fleet head-on and then execute a deliberate, chaotic, disorganized retreat. They'll fire wildly, break their groupings, and scream on open channels. They will look exactly like the undisciplined rabble that he thinks we are." He created a cone of engagement, drawing the massive hegemonic fleet forward in pursuit. This will appeal to Torx's sense of superiority. He will overcommit, pushing his entire fleet forward to crush us once and for all. Then, his finger tapped two locations on the map, on the flanks of the hegemony's projected advance. She didn't want to take over the ship. She just wanted one thing: the trigger for its main guns. The hegemonic comms, which the humans now monitored, filled with confused chatter from the destroyer's bridge. "Sir, our primary turrets move without command." "Lock it down," the captain barked. On his own command vessel, Zol frantically tried to sever the compromised ship's connection to the network, to isolate the cancer. But Ren was a virus that had already reached the heart. She slammed the digital fire command to the compromised system. The destroyer's turret, which had swiveled to lock onto its own squadron leader, unleashed a full, devastating volley of plasma. The squadron leader, a heavy cruiser, vanished in a flash of incandescent light. Before Zol or the destroyer's crew could react, Ren found the ship's reactor controls and triggered a catastrophic overload. The destroyer swelled, glowed, and then detonated, turning into a miniature sun. On the hegemonic network, the psychological shockwave was more damaging than the physical one. A ship had not been destroyed.
It had been turned into a weapon against its own. It was a violation. It was blasphemy. On the pristine, circular bridge of the flagship, the Will of Ages, High Sovereign Torx watched the recording of the destroyer's self-destruction. The hologram flickered and died, leaving a profound quiet in its wake. Logic Weaver Zol appeared as a smaller hologram beside the command throne. High Sovereign, the human corruption has breached our network. It is a form of digital chaos I have never witnessed. It seeks destruction, not control. It is blasphemous. One of Torx's subcommanders, a younger, decorated officer named Hale, stepped forward. His tusks were sharp and unadorned, a sign of a rising star. High Sovereign, he began, his voice carefully respectful. These humans do not fight with honor. Their chaos has a pattern. It is weaponized irrationally. Two large orbital debris fields, graveyards of old satellites and stations. And here's where our heavy hitters will be waiting. The Audacity, the Destroyers, the Miners. We'll hide in the junk, powered down. A ghost on their sensors, till it's too late. He drew two massive, sweeping lines of light, closing in on the rear of the hegemonic fleet. A pincer. When they're fully committed, we spring the trap. We hit them from the flanks and the rear. We sow chaos. But we will have one single, solitary objective. He drew a final straight line from the Audacity's starting position directly to Torx's flagship. We create a path to the Will of Ages. We ignore everything else. We go straight for the king. He looked up, a grim, wolfish smile on his face. He expects a formal duel in an open field. We're gonna drag him into a knife fight in a dark alley. The Anvil. That was the name Quinn gave to the hegemonic fleet. The unmoving, unbreakable object against which the hammer would fall. What was left of the outlaw fleet launched. From the bridge of the Will of Ages, Torx watched them come. To his sensors, and to his tactical officers, it looked like the death throes of a broken enemy. Their groupings were sloppy, almost non-existent. Some ships fired their main guns wildly from extreme range, the energy dissipating harmlessly long before it reached his shields. Others peeled off from the main group, seemingly in panic. Their communications, which his logic weavers were monitoring, were a cacophony of fear, rage, and contradictory orders. It was pathetic. Their spirit is broken, Torx announced to his bridge, a small, contemptuous smile touching his lips. They offer themselves up for slaughter. He raised a hand. All ships advance, full power. Wipe this rabble from the sky, and let us begin the pacification of their world. The hegemonic fleet surged forward, a perfect silver wedge of military might, a testament to 1,000 years of discipline and conquest. Their engines burned in perfect unison, their ship arrangements held with geometric perfection. They moved as one, a single glorious instrument of war, eager to crush the last pathetic remnants of the human resistance. Their discipline was their undoing. They plunged deeper and deeper into the kill box, becoming the perfect anvil, waiting for a hammer they would never see coming. The last of the hegemonic fleet passed the predetermined point, a large, dark orbital scrapyard designated Junkyard Alpha on Quinn's map. From the bridge of the Audacity, hidden deep within the cloud of dead satellites and wreckage, Quinn watched a single red icon cross a blue line on his tactical display. He took a deep breath. Now. The command was a whisper, but it echoed across the outlaw fleet's private network like a thunderclap. From within the clouds of orbital debris, engines ignited. The stolen destroyers, the repurposed miners, and the Audacity itself roared to life. They emerged from the junk fields in the flanks and directly behind the overextended hegemonic fleet. The trap was sprung. The human communications channels, once filled with faked panic, erupted in a cacophony of savage, joyous battle cries. The outlaws opened fire at point-blank range into the vulnerable rear and sides of the hegemonic ships. The pirate ship, the Scavenger, immediately latched a magnetic grapple onto a crippled hegemonic fighter, trying to reel in its prize even as the battle raged around it. The perfect silver wedge, caught completely by surprise, shattered into chaos. Engines flared as hegemonic captains tried desperately to turn and face the new threat, but it was too late. They were too close, too crowded. Ships slammed into each other, groupings disintegrated. The orderly precision became a panicked mob. The knife fight in the dark alley had begun. The battle became a maelstrom, a symphony of chaos conducted by madmen. Zane took helm of the Audacity herself. "Give me the barnstorming run," she yelled to her engineering crew. "Right past the lead cruiser." That battle cruiser, a ship designed for stately, long-range combat, screamed through the hegemonic fleet like a souped-up hot rod. As she passed within spitting distance of a hegemonic cruiser, she vented a massive plume of superheated plasma from her port maneuvering thrusters. The thermal bloom, a brilliant flare of white-hot gas, completely blinded the cruiser's local sensors and point defense cannons, overloading them with ghost signals and heat signatures. The hegemonic ship was forced to rely on the fleet-wide targeting data that Wren was currently savaging. Her final duel with Logic Weaver Zol was underway. He had fortified his network, building walls of impenetrable code around his core systems. But Wren abandoned attempts to break in. She kicked down the front door, bypassing the hegemony's sophisticated comm security with a brutal string of exploits. She seized control of their entire battle network's audio channels, and she flooded them with hell. The orderly, precise reports of hegemonic officers were drowned out by the raw, screaming fury of 21st century human death metal, blasted at maximum volume. The intricate tactical displays on their bridges were corrupted, overwritten with archival footage of New York and Tokyo burning, of human faces twisted in grief and rage, and underneath it all, a simple repeating audio loop. A sound of pure, primal insanity. Nash Rogers' manic, bloodthirsty laughter, recorded during the first boarding action. To the orderly, honor-bound hegemony, it was pure, soul-shattering madness. It was an emotional and sensory assault that they were culturally incapable of processing. Zol's elegant defenses, his cathedrals of logic, crumbled under the chaotic, emotional blitzkrieg. At the same time, Nash's team executed another attack, a Trojan shuttle. A small, heavily armored shuttle, broadcasting a stolen hegemonic distress signal, sped toward a dreadnought whose shields were flickering under the assault from the destroyers. The hegemony, their command structure in chaos, allowed it to approach. The shuttle did not dock. It slammed into the dreadnought's primary engineering section at full speed, a makeshift kinetic missile. Seconds before impact, Nash and his team launched from the shuttle in armored EVA suits, using the explosion as cover to breach the crippled hull. They were a wave of pure silence, the flashes of their shotguns now mixed with the telltale green pulses of captured hegemonic sidearms, turned against their former owners. The action surged towards its peak. High Sovereign Torx's flagship, the Will of Ages, was crippled. Its systems screamed under the digital and physical assault. Its shields were gone, its armor slagged and peeling away. His perfect fleet was broken, fighting and dying in isolated pockets against an enemy that seemed to be everywhere at once, an enemy that fought with the tactics of demons. Defeat was inevitable. But for a hegemonic warrior noble, there is a fate far worse than defeat: dishonor. The humiliation of being beaten by this vermin, this chaotic rabble, was more than his spirit could bear. Faced with this unbearable truth, Torx made his only choice that his culture, his religion, his very being allowed him. He stood on his shattered bridge, sparks raining down from the ceiling, and pointed toward the Audacity, which was now bearing down on them, the clear source of the command that was orchestrating this nightmare. "Divert all power to the forward engines," he commanded, his voice a low, guttural roar. "For the honor of the hegemony!" His officers obeyed. The Will of Ages, trailing fire and debris, a wounded beast making its final charge, lurched forward. It abandoned all pretense of fighting, became a spear aimed at the heart of its tormentor. With the shriek of tearing metal that carried across the vacuum, two flagships collided. They became locked in a death grip, two titans wrestling in the emptiness. And then, like massive steel fangs, boarding tubes punched through the Audacity's hull. The fight for Earth became a brutal hand-to-hand brawl on the bridge of a stolen warship. High Sovereign Torx, wielding a massive, crackling gravitic blade, led his personal honor guard. He was a force of nature, his blade carving through his makeshift defenses of the crew, his sheer size and fury unstoppable. A plasma bolt from a hegemonic rifle slammed into a nearby control console, shattering it. A nest of thick, sparking power conduits spilled onto the deck, writhing like angry, luminous snakes. But the bastards of Earth were on their own home turf. Nash met the hegemonic warriors with a shotgun in each hand and a feral grin. It was a whirlwind of violence, his close quarters chaos on the bridge being his natural element. It was a bar fighter, and this was the biggest bar fight in history. Ren, her console shattered, used the ship's own systems as weapons. With a few frantic keystrokes on a secondary panel, she sealed bulkheads and trapped a squad of hegemonic warriors in a corridor. Then she vented the entire corridor's fire suppression foam, blinding and choking them. Quinn, the disgraced commander, the washed-up drunk, picked up the fallen guard's plasma rifle. His movements were stiff, hesitant, but accurate. The muscle memory of an old soldier, buried under years of shame, was reawakening. He put himself between Torx and Zane, who was trying to seal a ruptured plasma conduit. He fired 3 quick shots, forcing the High Sovereign to block with his blade. Torx snarled and swatted the rifle from Quinn's hands with contemptuous ease. He pinned the old man to the deck with a massive foot and raised his crackling blade for the killing blow. At that exact moment, Zane, bleeding from a deep gash on her arm, saw her chance. Her eyes landed on the sparking nest of conduits writhing on the deck. With a desperate, primal roar, she grabbed the thickest of the power cables. She lunged forward and jammed the live, sparking end into a seam in the back of Torx's sophisticated armor, right at the base of his neck. Thousands of volts of raw, unregulated power surged through the High Sovereign's body. His technologically superior armor had no defense against such a crude, direct assault. He convulsed violently, every muscle locking. The gravitic blade fell from his hand, clattering to the deck. He collapsed, a mountain of dishonored flesh and metal, not killed by a fleet or a government or a soldier, but by a smuggler with a broken wire. With the death of the High Sovereign, a death broadcast from his own suit's biomonitors across the tattered remnants of their network, the hegemonic fighting spirit evaporated. Just as Quinn predicted, their rigid, honor-bound doctrine took over. The imperative was absolute. The senior officer was dead. To continue the fight without a clear chain of command was a dishonorable route. To withdraw and preserve the structure was the only honorable path. Across the battlefield, hegemonic ships immediately ceased fire. Their engines, which had been engaged in desperate maneuvers, pivoted in perfect, disciplined unison. Ignoring the human ships still firing on them, the entire surviving hegemonic fleet turned. In a flawless, silent arrangement, they accelerated and retreated from the Sol system, vanishing back into the blackness from which they came. The battle was over. In the sudden, shocking quiet, the outlaw fleet, a collection of battered, smoking, beautiful wrecks, drifted in orbit above the blue and scarred planet they had just saved. The guns were quiet. The war was won. On Earth, the victory was met with stunned disbelief. Then came the tidal wave of celebration. The outlaws, the criminals, the smugglers, the pirates, the dregs of society that the government of Earth spent decades hunting and prosecuting were hailed as heroes. Ticker tape parades were held in cratered cities. Their names were spoken with reverence. The governments of Earth and the corporations of the inner system found themselves in a political vice of their own making. They could not arrest the saviors of humanity, but they could not publicly condone the greatest acts of grand larceny in human history. So, in a series of quiet, backroom deals conducted over encrypted channels, they found a solution. They declared a universal amnesty. All outstanding charges against one Captain Zane, her crew, and every single outlaw who fought in the Battle of the Sol Gate were permanently cleared. The stolen warships of the Sol Defense Fleet, it was announced, were now deemed structurally compromised, dangerously modified, and unfit for formal military service. They were officially written off as combat losses. By refusing to reclaim the ships, the government saved face, and the bastards got to keep their toys. The final scene was one of quiet. The crew stood on the scorched, jury-rigged bridge of the Audacity. The air still smelt of burnt insulation, metal, and victory. Below them, Earth hung like a sapphire jewel, its fresh scars a stark reminder of what they fought for. A small, flickering screen on a side console displayed a list of outlaw ships lost in the final battle. A silent memorial scrolling through names like the Firefly, the Quarryman, the Lucky Strike, the Can Opener. Quinn picked up the empty whiskey bottle he had been drinking from before the battle. He held it up, not to his lips, but to the memory of the fallen. "To the bastards," he said, his voice clear and strong. He let the bottle drift from his fingers. It tumbled slowly out of a breach in the viewport into the silent, star-dusted expanse. Nash, bandaging a deep plasma burn on his arm, nodded quietly. "We'll break some extra nice in their honor," he promised. A rare moment of solemnity from the berserker. Ren stood by the main view screen, flipping her worn silver coin. Up, down, up, down. But for the first time, as it reached the apex of its flip, she snatched it out of the air and closed her fist around it. A silent decision to finally make her own luck. Zane watched them, her crew, her family. She looked from their tired, bruised faces to the fleet manifest on their screen. "The governments of Earth, they wrote us off as a combat loss," she said, a slow, tired, utterly genuine smile touching her lips. "Biggest insurance fraud in history." She clapped Nash on his good shoulder and turned to face the view screen, her smile widening into a familiar, mischievous grin. "Let's go find some trouble with the right then." The fleet of ugly, beautiful, smoking warships, the saviors and scum of Earth, turned its back on a grateful planet and roared into the endless, waiting black.